You know that feeling when you scroll through a dozen audio interfaces, each promising pristine conversion, endless plug-in power, and a plug-and-play experience, only to end up with a box that sounds flat in the mix or ties up your computer like a brick. I've been there spending hours reading spec sheets, watching glossy marketing videos, then realizing the gear just doesn't live up to the hype when you finally hit record. That's why I'm doing this deep dive, so you can avoid the disappointment and actually get a tool that makes a difference in your workflow. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Apple X8p Gen 2 isn't just another Thunderbolt interface. It's positioned as a hub for serious producers who want studio-grade conversion and onboard DSP that can run UAD's massive plugin library without draining your CPU. The first thing I wanted to verify was whether the next-generation audio conversion claim translates into something you can hear in a real mix, and whether the auto gain feature actually saves you time when you're juggling a drum kit, a vocal mic, and a line-level synth at the same time. Let's start with the conversion. In the studio I work in, I record a full band drums, guitars, keys, and vocals using a combination of mic'd amps and line inputs. The Apollo's AD/DA converters boast a dynamic range that, on paper, is among the widest you'll find in a desktop interface. When I routed the raw drum tracks through the Apollo's conversion chain, the low-end hit felt tighter and the cymbals retained more sparkle compared to my older 24-bit/48 kHz interface. That extra detail becomes noticeable when you add a subwoofer to your monitoring chain. The built-in bass management lets you send a dedicated low-frequency mix to the sub without having to set up a separate routing matrix in your DAW. For anyone who mixes in genres that rely on deep bass hip-hop, electronic, modern pop, that's a real time saver. The second promise is the ability to run UAD's 200-plus plugins directly on the interface. In practical terms, that means you can insert an analog classics tape emulator or a vintage preamp on any track and let the Apollo's DSP chips handle the processing. The advantage shows up when you start layering multiple high-end plugins on a single mix. I ran a session with 4 vintage compressors, a tape saturation, and a spring reverb on the master bus. My CPU usage stayed comfortably below 30% on an Intel i7-12700K, and there was no audible latency creeping in during playback. If you've ever tried to push a laptop to the limit with a full plugin stack and heard that dreaded audio drop, the Apollo's DSP can be a game changer. Auto gain is another feature that sounds nice on a spec sheet but often feels gimmicky in the field. In my experience, it actually works when you have a handful of inputs with similar source levels, say, a drum overhead pair and a bass DI. You hit the auto gain button, and the Apollo scans each input, setting the preamp gain so that the peaks land just below clipping. It saves you a few minutes of eyeballing meters, especially when you're in a rush to get a session started. However, if you're dealing with wildly different sources like a quiet acoustic guitar and a booming kick drum, the auto set gains can still need fine-tuning. So it's a helpful shortcut, not a total replacement for manual gain staging. Now, let's talk about who this box is really built for. If you're a professional mixing engineer who needs to run dozens of UAD plugins while keeping latency low, the Apple X8p is a solid investment. Its 8 mic/line inputs, 4 line outputs, and 2 dedicated headphone outputs give you the flexibility to record a full band without having to patch in external preamps. The Thunderbolt 3 connection provides the bandwidth needed for that 24-bit/192 kHz conversion, meaning you won't be limited by sample rate choices when you're chasing that ultra-high resolution sound. And if you already own a library of UAD plugins, you'll see immediate ROI because you can finally use them on every track without overloading your computer. On the flip side, if you're a hobbyist home studio kid just starting out, the Apple X8p might feel like overkill. The price point is steep, and you need a computer with a Thunderbolt 3 port. Most budget laptops still ship with USB-C or older USB-A. The unit itself occupies a full rack space, and its power draw can be noticeable. You'll need a decent power conditioner if you're running other gear on the same strip. For a bedroom producer who mostly records vocals and a couple of guitars, a smaller Apollo Solo or even a Focusrite Scarlett could give you the same basic functionality for a fraction of the cost. One hidden trade-off that many buyers miss is the learning curve around UAD's console software. The Apollo doesn't just sit in your DAW, it brings its own mixing environment where you can route inputs, apply DSP, and set monitor mixes. I spent a few evenings learning how to create separate monitor mixes for